Hi, I'm Seamless, and this is the part 2 of the making of Glass, where we're talking about the sound design. It's gonna be good stuff. So this track is relatively straightforward when it comes to sound design. It uses a lot of sort of realistic sounding things and not super complication when it comes to the bass sounds. While it might seem complicated when we open up the first of the number of the bass tracks, we have to realize that most of the basses are pretty much clones of this exact thing, with minor variations to accentuate their particular feel. And there's a couple of other like separate sounds, but for the most part, it's pretty straightforward stuff. In the very beginning of the track, the first thing that we're kind of struck with is this bass guitar patch. And it's also coincidentally where all the clicking is coming from, all that popping and whatever is from the Contact just being itself. So here's Contact and here's the bass patch. Now, this is what the bass patch sounds like without the processing. This is not fairly traditional bass guitar processing, if only because we're doing it with sort of just straight plugins. What I mean by that is that usually when we talk about guitar processing, we talk about like we got our distortion heads, and then cabinet emulations and all that kind of stuff, and then pre-distortion, and then the screamer pedal emulations and whatever, all that stuff. And the reason why this isn't mostly the case for this particular guitar patch is because usually when you're talking about making a guitar, like a bass guitar tone, you're treating the bass guitar like it's a clean guitar. A clean guitar could pretty much just be done with some compression and reverb, and then you're more or less done. And that's basically what's happening here. We got a big old EQ, which is accentuating the sort of the tone, the areas of the tone that I want. It's hard to tell because most of the higher frequencies are just like super dead, and the at least in comparison to the lower frequencies. And this all gets taken care of once the compression gets involved. That all that clipping is actually from the master because we have that still on. Actually, no, it's actually clipping here. The ensuing EQs get rid of the sort of the top end of that. A lot of these were done together. Like a lot of the effects when I'm doing them, I'm not like, I don't start the sound being like, yes, that sounds good. I probably started the sound with the compression, and then did some post, and then did some pre-EQ to kind of shape the sound before it goes to the compression. And then a little bit after EQ, once I added the reverb before the compression, to get kind of the ultimate sound. So to make this make sense, we got like what the compression is doing. So we see I split this into bands, and like most of the sound is like in the low here, but I have an extremely thin band right in the middle. In this area here in the frequency spectrum is what I refer to as the twang of the guitar string. Very buzzwordy, I know, but the twang represents the higher harmonics that are specific to the thickness of a guitar string. If you look at I should probably have an example of this, but if you look at a guitar string, the guitar signal when you're playing it, this is true for bass guitar as well, but if you look at the signal, you have like your fundamental tones area, like not really the fundamental tone unless you're playing a higher note. The lower the string, the less that actual sub is present, and for a bass guitar, it's practically non-existent. But the first couple of harmonics are there, and that's usually enough to give us the signal of there being a note there, and then that's fine. And then we get sort of this empty-ish range, and then we have like the 2K, 5K range where we get, in this case, 1K, 2K because we're so bass guitar, bass guitar. We get essentially those ringing harmonics that are up there. Now that sort of mastering the twang and EQing it before things like distortion or whatever we're doing here will dramatically change what the ultimate guitar tone sounds like. So like a lot of really modern heavy metal, the twang is like super accentuated before it's distortion, and so we get like a really voicey sounding guitar tone. So many buzzwords. And then like if you get rid of the twang, you get a lot of sort of 90s post also alt rock, new metal kind of stuff. Think like a Linkin Park guitar tone. That's pretty what happens when we don't have twang. It's a lot smoother, it's a lot more consistent, and it's not as like in your face as like the more modern metal tones are. And it's more or less the same thing is true for bass guitars. I'm accentuating the hell out of the twang on the bass guitar. I mentioned that it's relative to the thickness of the string. So if I play, no matter what note I play, if I'm playing it on the same string, the twang will be in the same exact place, regardless of the note itself. That's because the product of the twang, the reason the twang is there is because of the thickness of the string. So like on the 6 strings of the guitar, you're going to have 6 different sort of twang locations. You get high enough. Actually, this is pretty much only true for round wound strings. Flat strings, that like the higher strings on the guitar, that are just straight up like a string of metal, that they don't really do the twang thing, but they're also high. There's also high enough harmonically that there's not really enough room there for it to be anything anyway. Round strings are the ones that make the twang. And then you have flat wound strings, which are different entirely, and you might notice that they're like the darkest sounding strings ever because they don't have that twang, because that's a quality pretty much unique to the round wound strings. So the bigger you go, the lower the twang gets, and this is where the twang is for this particular bass guitar's sample set. And I'm EQing it and I'm crunching it up super hard. And you can see, even though like this is how hard I'm crunching it up, and this is only how much comes out. Like this isn't how it, like this is the input of that range. It was very, very quiet. So I'm pulling up super hard. Same thing with the higher frequencies, although we are killing most of the higher frequencies. That actually contributes quite well to making it feel like sort of a processed bass guitar in sort of the traditional sense, because a lot of what happens when you're using a cabinet for like a guitar sound and then recording with a microphone, you lose a lot of the high frequencies because that's what the cabinets do. Although bass cabinets that are designed for bass guitars actually have a wider frequency response than a guitar cabinet. They usually have more high frequency response just because of that sort of shimmery twanginess that they want to get out of a bass guitar, which is sort of an interesting paradox if you think about it. So then the reverb, I'm using Valhalla Room for this, is here to give it like a kind of a roomy feel. And that's before the compression, because I just wanted it to kind of be pulled into the soup, which made sense in my head to say. Actually, writing lines for this was very interesting, because you see I'm doing a lot of minor seconds. I mentioned it in the arrangement video about how like it doesn't. The chords that I'm using aren't, I mean, they're minor, but they're not like that kind of minor. But let's talk about the chords, since we're there. And there's those clicks again all of a sudden. So maybe they weren't the contact. So this is a harmor, as most things are. On post, we got like a big old EQ that's just kind of fitting things in there, and then some reverb to kind of fit. I really like Valhalla Room. I should look at more of the things that Valhalla does, because the guy that does it is very good. Square type harmonic series, and I have the harmonizer on. Well, where's the harmonizer? The harmonizer is after the filter, and I have a low pass filter. So the what's happening is that this is coming down on the harmonic series, and then because the harmonizer is after the filter, it's harmonizing the profile that it creates after that. So we're actually creating frequencies that would have been filtered with the harmonizer, but after the filter. And we're also playing chords, so a lot of that's getting in there. It's a good thing we're on the advanced page, because I turned the ramping down. By default, it's over here somewhere, but we're turning it down this way. Ramping is a little bit like the declicking. It's essentially like a really fast volume envelope on the beginnings of all the harmonics. It prevents it from doing that. So that's why I have a little bit there. But sometimes it's a little too long. And if you ever wanted like your harmony to sound sharper, this is where you would do it. So does that. We have 9 voices unison. I don't think I'm doing anything in here. Nope. So it's all pretty regular stuff. I have the phaser on. Didn't realize that. On the Hertz mode. It's moving incredibly slow. I don't have... It's a very subtle phaser in there, and that's contributing to the kind of the Wurlitzer kind of sound going on in there. And although I mean the phase cancellation from the unison will do that as well. And of course the chorus, super light chorus. You could barely even see that it's on. A bunch of reverb. That's really all there is to this sound. The low harmonic count is being accomplished through the low pass. I have the keyboard tracking on, so that's what's causing it to just be that series. And again, the harmonizer. Just adding like just a teensy bit of mess on top of that. It's the same series, but like what harmonics are being accented are different than if I had just left the filter open. Played high enough. We have a vague Rhodesy kind of sound, that kind of keyboardy electric piano kind of deal. That's more or less what I want out of that, and that's what the sound is. Then after that we get let's look at something a little interesting. So we have this bass complement. It's not actually showing up here. We start to hear it. Actually, not until here, I don't think. Yeah. So is this fade in here? So this is primarily like this is what it's called. It's a complement to the main bass guitar part, just to kind of make it a more interesting layer. What's going on here is a harmor. I don't know what this sounds like by itself. I kind of don't remember making this. Song is very old, as I mentioned various times. Oh, we got plenty of stuff in post too. Alright, so that's what this sounds like by itself. Two voices in unison, nothing going on in any of the windows, so this is all kind of more just what we see is what it is. I have ramping off, which is contributing to that kind of like scratchy feel, although we got a lot of distortion, so there's that too. A pluck is on, and with a regular pluck shape, what the pluck does is it just kind of makes that sound be a thing. This is what the pluck does. It creates this particular filter configuration, which causes it to sound plucky. No filtering, no harmonizer. We're on the saw side, some unison. We're in square mode, and it's also an octave lower for some reason. That's kind of interesting. I think it's just because I used the same MIDI from the bass. I didn't want to move it. And then there's distorted. So not a huge amount happening, really, in terms of like the sound design on the harmor. God, I really should close Facebook when I'm making these videos. Professional! I make a living doing this. And then it goes in this EQ, which is removing some of the high-end fuzz, but also adding in a chorus. The chorus by itself just kind of moves it around like that. And then that EQ and the chorus gets into this distortion unit, which is then being kind of colored. Here's the distortion. And here's the coloration. This kind of makes it a little bit more high frequency. And then this gets put into a bandpass filter. This band 4 here is being controlled by this dude here. That's this automation that's showing up for that. So bandpass filter. I'm not really sure why I did this out here and not in the patcher. It must have been an afterthought. Actually, I think I remember I was trying to make the sound that this was like that was going to be like the layer to the bass guitar, but then it just sounded more interesting to have the bandpass filter, and then a big flanger to give it that weird tin candy kind of feel. This was kind of to convolute the frequencies created by the bandpass filter, so it's not just like the most basic normal bandpass filter. And a big compressor because we lost all of our gain. Compressing mostly the mids and the highs, and we don't want the lows because this is essentially a layer to the other bass guitar, and the bass guitar has plenty of the lows, so we don't really need to have lows coming in here. Not to mention, nothing has sub pretty much until this point here, which is a deliberate, thing to do when we're doing intros. I generally prefer not to have sub as pretty much as close as possible to the drop, unless I'm like making a specific point about basses or something in the beginning, and then some actual mixing EQ. And that's more or less that sound. I mean, we're moving around with a bandpass, but it's mostly the flanger at the end that creates the primary tone from this. Again, in the beginning, actually, let's talk about, is it this guy? That's basically just a clap with a lot of reverb. I had another kind of hit that was a bit more hitty. Was this guy? Yeah. So this actually was an impact from like a pack that I low passed and reverbed, but you actually could do this with like a kick. You can just get a kick and then put a crap ton of reverb on it, and then compress the hell out of the reverb on the bass, just so that there's a lot of bass rumble, and you get more or less that sound. It's actually a lot simpler than sort of I made it out to be the way that I actually made it. And I talk about the chords, and then, oh yeah, the verby. So there's this kind of guy, which exists to make a sort of background business. So we got a pluck, some unison, was mostly panning and not a lot of motion there, so it's sort of creating a slow phase cancellation. Prism to kind of convolute that. And not a lot else happening on the actual harmor. The thing that's sort of doing it is shimmer, where we have the shift is all the way up, so it's kind of moving up when it moves up. And the feedback is not very loud, though. However, I have a huge mod depth on the pitch modulation in this mod rate. So it's actually sort of just LFOing the pitch of the reverb. So we get like the kind of thing. And it makes it feel kind of sinister and whimsical. And I have this replacement just in case you don't do that, but it doesn't have the pitch weirdness. I have vibrato on. Okay, so that's one thing. You can kind of see that happening in the harmonics. Like, that is vibrato. So that's contributing to the waviness. This is a very wavy sound. Wavy. And it's there primarily to just sort of fill up the background. It shows up in the drop too, along with the other guy, the other high frequency sort of background sound. And actually, that's the next sound that shows up, isn't it? Oh, no, there's some other stuff over here. There's these guys. So this is a resample. Like, I think I actually might have harmor resampled this. I don't remember. I might not even be from this project. So this is what the original sample was like, and the reason why it's all reverbed out like this is because one thing I like to do is to make a big old weird bass like this, put a bunch of reverb on it, and then reverse it. And I'm using that more or less just for that. So that's kind of what that sounds for. As far as creating that sound, you probably could have done that with the bass complement here. I'm using it. It's like the same kind of deal, band pass kind of flangery sound. And then reverse, no, just put the sample through reverb and then reverse the reverb sample. And you've got that. More or less all that required. So other things happen here. So we have one of the actual basses. We have a couple basses, actually. And a bass complement. This is actually a huge layer of a bunch of things. Yep. Now, where does this happen? Is this? Yep. So there's an automation down here for turning on that particular EQ, or turning off. It's one of these. And this EQ is a high pass and low pass. And it's moving against itself. Just to kind of screw with it. But you see this says bass is 4 to 7. And they're mostly the same sound-ish, I guess. I put them all on the same thing. And these are kind of moving around in here. Bass 6. Still bass 6. This is bass 3. Oh yeah, so this is when it starts to get normal. We start to hear the first hit, like the dart, dart, dart. Oh, the oop. What the hell's the oop? What are you? Vague kind of acidy sound. All right. And then, so we got a harmor. And what's the EQ doing in here? What am I automating? It seems to think I'm automating something. It must be like a low pass, high pass thing. So got a pluck. The ramping is pretty far down. Higher frequency, and I'm actually collapsing the harmonics. So I was a little bit mistaken about what this does. I mean, I was accurate in that it crunches the harmonics together. So you would play the sound, and then you can see it moves the harmonics closer together. But the thing is, though, is that once it does that, it basically, much like when you do the opposite, when you multiply it, it puts the harmonic series into that of a square wave. When you bring it down, it takes the harmonic series as if the fundamental were now the first harmonic. So it's actually still the same series, and it's just as if you high-passed it completely. It's really very weird to think about, because I had thought that it was creating an entirely different series that was separate from the normal sort of set. And to a certain extent it is, because some of the higher harmonics don't actually align perfectly. And what I mean by higher harmonics, I mean like the highest harmonics. Because there's some funkery you can do where like you multiply it all the way up and then you bring it down so that the first harmonic is actually the fundamental, and then it's kind of out of tune with itself, because that from there the fundamental of the series isn't perfectly aligned, but it's aligned enough that you can still kind of hear the note. So there's a little bit of differences there. But point being is that it does this to the harmonics, and we're playing that higher frequency, so that it still kind of sounds like it's the right note, but the togetherness of it causes this particular timbre. I have weird harmonic unison pitch, which is just serving to convolute the, because we're using 9 voices, we can't really detect the precise alterations of this. When we're using 2 voices, we can usually hear it like pretty clearly, but when we're using 9 voices, this is just a big wash of nothing. But this does sort of change what that nothing is going to be, so that's why I do that, to make it a bit more interesting. I have the harmonic mode for the phaser, which is actually going to make this apply to the shape that it creates, which is really hard to tell with what we're doing here, because they have a bandpass filter going up and down about it, but with a little bit of harmonic protection engaged, which ensures that the lower harmonics are kind of still present during all of this. A lot of distortion, so that's coming in there. The pluck is making it shorter. Pluck shape. So I made a weird pluck shape. Now, what the pluck is doing is that it just sort of do this with another harmonic, just because it's easier to show than it is to explain. So normal signal is like this. Oh, that delay on the notes there. And this is what it does. If you go to the pluck shape, you would first look at this and think that, okay, this is just essentially how fast the pluck is plucking, because if you do this, it looks more or less right, then you do this, it plucks faster. But really what this graph represents is how long it takes the harmonics to decay per harmonic. Each of these poles represents 1 octave's worth of harmonics, which is to say, distribution-wise, it's this distribution, only it's given even relative to the octaves. It's supposed to be relative to the harmonics themselves. So if I did something like this, this is saying that these harmonics go away immediately and these harmonics stay around forever. Or at least a very long time, depending on how long this is. So when we do something like this, it's saying that these harmonics take a while, these harmonics go away a bit, but that these harmonics take away as well. And you get these kinds of positions. So that's what the pluck shape changer actually is doing. In case that was confusing to you. I operate at a very different assumption for kind of a long time. And this is what this is doing. Which again, you can kind of see that happening up here a little bit. That might actually be from the phaser. It's really hard to tell because I'm bandpassing a lot of it. And then distorted and reverb and delay. Not much else is happening. We'll have harmonic phase ramp disengaged, which is turning it from being a sharper. Although, given all the unison they're doing, that has very little impact on the overall tone. Oop. That's there to kind of add again some more, it's a little bit more melodic ambience to things. That was a very late addition, actually. I remember to this whole deal. So the bass action in here are from the basses that are in the drop, but they're being low passed, and I'm not totally sure how I'm accomplishing that. All right, so I think it's just this first bass the whole time, and with a couple of like this guy comes in, and this guy has a high pass filter that only happens right here. happens somewhere. Or it's in a patcher. Yeah. So we have, you see these fruity balances here. So there's this high pass filter and this reverb only happen here. I believe they're being automated. Yeah, here it is. So this automates it on and then off, and then the next time we hear it, it's the normal sound. So that's over here. That sounds like, you know, normally. And then it gets faded and faded, and eventually it's just a drop. And it's pretty great. Yeah. Cool beans. What else is important? Oh, the riser. So this riser was actually a pretty regular, normal riser. And then I time stretched it and pitched it up using the monophonic mode, which is causing all the various artifacting that happens when we just kind of listen to it by itself. Yeah. I don't remember how I made that riser. That probably would have been helpful. Sorry about that. And then before we talk about the basses, let's talk about this guy. The scary sound. So the main animations here are basically just level. I'm automating the actual insert, which I don't usually recommend doing. This is a tell about sort of how old this track is that I'm doing that. And then this EQ, am I low passing it? Is that what's happening? Harmony number 8 envelope. So it's actually up in here. What am I automating here? The phaser. All right. So I have the phaser, I have the frequency mode on. All right, so this is what's happening. I have the frequency mode engaged in a phaser, and I have this shape going on, which is really, really fast. And I'm essentially sort of forcing additive FM into the picture here. So this is the wave line type inside the line editor, and I just essentially made it like really thick, like so. And I turned the speed all the way up, so it's the speed is how fast it's scanning this shape, and so it scans this shape really fast, and the shape itself is really dense with motion, so that means that it's scanning really fast motion really fast, and that creates the FM. I have a phaser mask engaged, which is determining how much FM is being applied to what harmonics at what time. I also have vibrato on, so it's moving up and down, but then you can also kind of see more, it's spreading out, but you can see it spreading up, but you can see it spreading out differently on different harmonics, and that's causing this extremely strange sounding sort of wail to come out of it. Now, you can kind of do this with regular FM, and the thing that will make it sound like this is that the FM is not the right pitch. It's not synced correctly to the pitch of whatever harmonics you're using. And also, it's using a rather high frequency, or rather high like harmonic complexity sound. So, like a saw wave or something, you can, if you pitching that really fast with FM at an incorrect pitch, you'll get kind of this sound. I really didn't do the graining thing. So I didn't, what would have helped here is if I had increased envelope granularity. Envelope granularity is essentially the resolution of the envelope's motion. So like, if you had a perfect like curve going on with the envelope and you didn't have high envelope granularity, what you would see as actual motion output is like jaggedy, like hexagonal angles in what would be a perfectly smooth curve. More granularity means the closer it gets to that curve's actual motion. It can't be perfectly like that because that's, you know, infinite points and all that, but you can get a lot closer with higher granularity. And higher granularity actually means less of the value. So I guess lower granularity. Because you can see it's by milliseconds. So half a millisecond, essentially, it's sampling the curve of your automation versus its typical 2 milliseconds, which is still really fast. And you really usually don't notice the difference. But when we're moving so ridiculously fast like this, because this is essentially talking about the resolution of this graph, and this graph being FM, it's essentially the resolution is affecting how close to this actual shape it is, which is very important for the tone. And if I cared enough to make it actually as close to that shape as possible, I would have engaged this, but I didn't know what that did back then. It's not that important because it's not about like what sounds better or worse. It's about what sounds closer to what you're actually doing, which I suppose is important. That it sounds pretty close to what you're doing. But as this particular example shows, this is it's not necessarily a worse sound. It's just different. For example, with it. You can see this motion is a lot higher resolution than it was a minute ago. So it's a similar sound. It's just different. So it depends on you, to know whether or not you like which ones are what, that kind of thing. For all I know, I would have liked it with less resolution. Yeah, default is fine for me. So there's some unison I have vibrato engaged, really, really high notes, some delayed reverb in there, and then that's all the rest of it's happening in post. More reverb on top. Just regular reverb. Whoop. And then that EQ, which I guess I'm low passing the sound at some point. It's kind of weird. So here's the phaser that's essentially density of FM, and then this is the volume of the overall thing. So it kind of fades in over time. And this is in the intro, but I did actually originally design this to be in the drop, and that's why it's out here, kind of doing its thing. So now let's talk about the basses. And stuff. So pretty much every bass are all sourced from this guy, which I talked about already kind of a lot if you've seen the rest of the making of the tracks. However, since I'm sure a lot of people have come to this track specifically just to hear this track's making of, I'm going to actually tell you everything about it again. Anyway, this is the Reese. In the beginning, it was a citrus. Let's just get rid of that. Not terribly complicated. So we have a saw wave that's detuned, and then another saw wave that's not detuned. You might be thinking to yourself, "Oh my god, that's not a saw wave," and that's because it was a saw wave. In Citrus, you can convert a shape to its component harmonics, very additive way. It's almost like Harmor. In fact, it's exactly like Harmor. And then you can randomize the phases of each individual harmonic. As it turns out, the shape of a saw wave is determined by the fact that all these harmonics are playing at the same time and at the same phase. They're all starting at the same time. And if you randomize the phases so they're not starting at the same time, you entirely lose the sharpness of a saw wave. And so a saw sounding as sawy as it does is because of that. And if you get rid of it, you get a kind of cloudy thing. So the two of these are coming together, and they're different pitches, and so it causes our typical sort of phase cancellation. But because of the difference in the actual phase relationship, it's slightly different in terms of actual reasing. This gets put into a bunch of distortion. So this distortion and this distortion, this was sort of an experiment when I initially did this, where I wanted to see what like basic folding looks like. And this is what basic folding looks like. Folding is where you continue to do this kind of thing, and you get a kind of an FM-y kind of feel to it. And actually, it's pretty close to what FM does to a waveform when you wave shape up something like this. It's because this element essentially shows up as like a curve like this in an oscillation that would have originally been one oscillation, and now it's an oscillation with a whole bunch of internal oscillations, and that's essentially what FM is. So a little bit of that going on, and so we have some like the higher range of this guy, and then we have a chorus on top of this guy, and then we have the sub all coming to interact into this last distortion, which has the smooth stairs type, which causes a teensy bit of a similar sort of FM-y sound, and all that together sounds like this. Individually, we have just the sub coming in to add to the bottom of it all. And then we have this dude. And then we have this dude. Which all together and then with distortion, we get that. And then we have this EQ here. which is almost entirely responsible for creating the tone that we get out of this. The sort of typical drum and bassy sounding Reese feel is from having a big old cut at 500 hertz like that. It's pretty straightforward. The story of creating the sound was that I was doing, I think, a 40K. It might have been a 30K. Might have been a 20K for all I remember. Come on, mouth. And it was a Skrillex, Smile and Otis, and Kill the Noise sound, I think. It was that song, and it's a very donkey kind of song. And the hit that was like the main bass of that song had a kind of a Reese undertone to it. And when I was making the sound, I got the Reese undertone pretty clearly, but then like couldn't really get the percussive sound really at all. So, but when I was done with it, I was kind of like, I had never gotten this on point with this kind of sound like this before. You see these two automation handles here. It's because I was automating a growl to kind of move around with this to fit the donker hit thing. But so when I was done with that, I just saved this portion of it because there was more in here as a separate sound, like as like a layer. And I decided that, and then later around then I made this song, and I was just kind of like, I'll just use this Reese. And I did. And it gets compressed a lot. Typical, just bring up all the bands and then limit it on top. I didn't really try very hard with that. A little bit of a cut here before distortion. Two different kinds of distortion. I wasn't paying attention specifically to what kinds of distortion I was using. It just that they were different. And more compression again. These two are just limits, I think. Now they're actually doing something. So here's a reason why I usually refer to Maximus as being a wave shaping compressor, which is a little bit of a misnomer, not because it doesn't do that, but because wave shaping, compression, and distortion, and all of that are really all the same thing. And any compressor. It's just that compressors typically don't give you the kind of controls capable enough to move it around as such that you would have some similar control as you do to the wave shaper. Maximus does. And while you can treat Maximus like a typical compressor and just have like regular, here's threshold and here's the ratio and then that kind of thing, you can also do kind of weird crap like this. And what this is essentially saying is that, like, okay, when it gets to be this loud, it gets pulled up to here, and then when it gets to be louder, it actually gets brought back down to be louder from being as loud, and then it pulls back up and whatever. And this is all happening, if it's fast enough, which this actually isn't, this would all be happening per oscillation, so up and down, up and down, up and down kind of thing. But because the time variables are preventing it from actually impacting itself upon the sound that fast, it doesn't shape the waveform. The difference between wave shaping and compression is that wave shaping is compression that moves fast enough to shape the waveform. If it compresses faster than the oscillation of a waveform, it will do that. Wave shaping distortion is doing that, but with zero time variables whatsoever, and is moving it all in real time. You can actually make Maximus do that by turning off all the time variables, these four knobs right here. If these are all off, it will be a wave shaper. Slightly less, like, on point than an actual wave shaper, but close enough that it will distort things quite handily. Yeah, and we're doing that on the mids just because it kind of screws it up and it sounds neat. And all of that gets together to eventually add up to being the sound. And then I have like some EQs and stuff in post, which are just mostly just mixing. And then this is that low pass from the beginning that fades in and out. And while it's all by itself, it's not actually doing it. So that's what this guy sounds like. The next bass, slightly different. And I'm pretty sure the only difference here is I introduced a variable on the original Citrus. And this is funky. Did the phases just end up like this, or did I do something to it? Hold on. Oh, okay. So typically when you're, I guess I'm moving this skew. I don't want to mess this up now. So typically when you do the whole saw wave thing and you make it into a sine harmonics like this, it's making into sine wave harmonics. But Citrus doesn't require that you actually make harmonics out of sine waves all the time. You can actually change the shape of your waveform to continue to add more harmonics. So now we're making triangle wave harmonics, which dramatically changes the sound. And on the oscillator that's doing this, I like it to go all the way up to a pulse width modulated square harmonic. And it's causing this ridiculous DC offset against a regular saw wave. However, this regular saw wave is being FM'd by a triangle wave at a very low pitch. And it sounds like that when I do that. That's weird that that sounds wrong. Let's see what this sounds like without all the strangeness. Fwa, fwa. Yep, that's what it sounds like. Am I changing the pitch of something over time? That sounds like I am. I am. So the second one starts high and goes low. Am I doing that in the first one? No. Okay. Now, we're looking at this from the perspective of what the citrus sounds like, but I did not make any of these decisions from what the citrus sounds like. These are all the same. This is the same. That's actually different. I made it a sharp line instead of a curve. That's a bit different. That's a bit different. That's the same. These are all pretty much the same. Essentially, to make variations, I came in here and I changed the base citrus patch. Considering how much processing is being applied to this and how much this distortion and whatever, minor changes to things on the beginning of the citrus at the very beginning will create incredible changes to things. So that's kind of the name of the game when it comes to the rest of these. So like this guy has a lot more audible like reasing to it. And this happens because I have the saw wave is this is a higher. These are all way higher pitched from each other. So this is now sine waves again, but I've elected to re-randomize the phases, and I've locked the first couple harmonics like this. So we're actually getting more of a semblance of a tone that's together as a result of that. Regular saw wave, but this saw wave is up 0.05 in the pitch, and this one is down a whole 0.1, so it's really far away. And then I added together this series, which is a square, and I randomized this too, and it has effects. It has flanging and chorusing engaged. Oh hey, I'm not even using this guy. Okay, so so this is 5 up and 5 down, essentially 0.05 up, 0.05 down, which makes it a lot farther away than the other one. The other one was 0.3 apart. This one is 0.03 apart. This one is 0.1 apart, talking in ratio terms of pitches, which is making it farther away, which is making the reasing a lot more noticeable. Now, what's interesting about what's happening here is that the phase cancellation is only happening on particular harmonics. Because this is a square series, every other harmonic is engaged, which means that the even numbered harmonics that would be in this are not phase canceling against itself. So it's like alternating square positions of harmonics, which is very interesting to me. And then this is the same, this is the same, this is that other guy again, and then this is that, this is the same. It's pretty straightforward. Is that really the hold on, let me check to make sure that this. Yeah, see, this time, the first time I did the stairs thing. And this time, and the first time I didn't have that little bump at the beginning there. Teensy bit of crossover distortion. And there's this guy. Which is, again, slightly different. The same saw and square. In fact, this one seems more or less the same. What's different about this guy? Same all of these. Same sub. Are these really that different? They're even in the same freaking. So then we gotta play the whole what's different game. Is it just a different series? That'd be kind of funny if it was. Yeah, it's quite interesting. It's possible that I may have created different compression, like much like even if I didn't do any changes here, I made some minor change somewhere that's causing a slight difference to occur. Maybe it's here. No, here. No, there. Nope, these are all the same. That's the same. That's the same. That's the same. That's the same. I may have made one of these louder. That's possible. Somewhere in there I made a minor change. And that was that. Another one that feels fairly normal. 1 and 3 again. What about this one is different? Is a good question. This one I feel like I use less effects. I use no effects. So on this one I used the effects module inside Citrus. I had the chorus engaged, and this one I did not. That's the only difference between that one. There's that one, and this one. What do you do different? This one has a not as loud original saw with different harmonic profile and different harmonic profile for the square. So like that's all that I changed in this one. I just messed with the harmonics in these two here, and then turned down the saw, and that was enough to make it sound like that. Now this one I already know is a lot different. This one has a bandpass automation in it. That's this guy, and I put that right between this EQ and this guy. That's pretty much the biggest difference I put in there. And in fact, this one is more or less the original guy. But this time with I have the effects. There's no reverb or delay or anything, but I have a lot of chorus, and I'm inversing the polarity of it, which I'm not even sure what that would do against this. This one doesn't have. This one's not reasing actually. It's the same pitch saw. Although this one, I believe the pitch is changing in this one, yeah. So it starts off reasing and then it comes down together. This is actually a technique that I developed using Harmor, where I would have unison, and then I would turn the unison off after like a short amount of time, so that the unison was on enough time to create a phase disparity, and then when it came back together, it was solid, so that I could do stuff to it like some automation, and it would be homogeneous with itself. That's not super necessary given what I'm doing here, but that's more or less the same idea. Just the regular saw against the screwed up saw with some of the harmonics at the beginning kind of normal, and the rest of it very random. And then all the same processing here. That's the same. Wow. Okay. So this one did away. Yeah, this one did away with the stairs thing. This has a larger section of the crossover distortion. Everything else is pretty normal. Wait, I have a lot more choruses. Okay, so I put a shit ton of choruses in between the EQ and then this guy, which went into the split over here. These are mostly low time variable stuff, so the low depth, low delay, and then this one has a really high delay. You can sometimes I'll put like a bunch of choruses after each other, like one after another, that are just the same chorus, which you might be thinking, well, it's the same sound over and over again. But because the previous chorus signal is going into the new chorus, this creates a new sound entirely. Because if it were the same chorus on the same sound 3 times, then yes, that would be the same sound, just added together. But because the first chorus had naked sound into it by itself, the second chorus has that sound with the chorus. It's actually a different signal, which comes out to be a different signal. But this actually just has slightly different parameters. And I have the LFO on these guys. So this one, you have LFO 1, LFO 2, and LFO 3. These are LFO on the stereo, LFO on the depth, LFO on the delay. And so it means that they have whatever parameter you set for them, and then they move them around slightly. So like how fast you move around will determine sort of the character and the tone over time, that kind of thing. So if they're all different, then you get a wildly different profile when they have more than one together. These are all in serial. Oh, wait, they're in serial, but some of them are going in the other one. So this one goes into this one, and then this one goes into both this one, and this one also goes into that one. So it creates an even more convoluted profile, which I haven't done a lot of recently. This is something that I did in my track Tachycardia, actually. The main bass for that sound was more or less entirely created by crap like this. I believe I also used flangers for that. And then this has automation on it. Typically, though, like in the actual drop, I use mostly high notes for it. And that kind of thing. But it's also the sound that's from here. That's that sound. It's the same Reese, but with a lot of the with that bandpass on it. Now I also used this Reese, if you remember, in Ruin, which is why we're talking about this again. And I used a flanger on it, which made it sound pretty close to sort of the original old Invisible recordings and Noisiest kind of style. And a lot of the drum and bass processing and sound design is basically taking Reeses like this and then just doing regular stuff to it. Like put a bandpasses on it, put choruses on it, do the thing with the phase cancellation. Like it's all this sound, and you can create that whole variety, that whole section of it all. It's really quite nice. That's all of the basses in this track. They're all that. So then we have the chorus come back in, and then we have new chords with this Rhodes. Because like, I needed to add something, and I didn't know what to add. And so I added this, and this is just the Rhodes preset from Harmor. Just go into the Harmor presets, Rhodes. That's what that is. And nothing else is new. This is entirely all of it. All right. So yeah, don't forget that you can actually get your hands on this project if you want to. This very project, the one we've been using, is for sale. The fixstore.com/SeamlessR. What you want is the deluxe version of the Wizard Bass EP. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.